Okay, good morning. Quick recap of last night's Dark Age of Man. Great session. I want to thank the guys. It's been weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks maybe. Um, so a couple things. We had a nice 30-minute chat as Dell was trying to get his audio configured. And then we launched. I think the game went about 2 hours and 20 minutes, and then we talked for a good, I've had close to an hour afterward, which can be seen at the end of that actual play video from last night. I then rendered it and got it uploaded and went to bed. So I haven't really reflected a lot on the details. I'll talk in general, I think, about this session. A couple things first. One, I noticed, I'm assuming a subscriber mentioned that we're not so much grimdark as grim, and that's 100% right. Dark Age of Man is a pseudo-historical Dark Ages fantasy that is more grounded in real than fantasy, but has fantasy elements. An ogre can show up, a dragon, a witch, a cannibalistic demon, those things can show up. But you create a character in a world that resembles the Dark Ages to some degree, obviously, fictionalized quite heavily. And you're going to deal with political conflict. You're going to deal with class conflict, culture conflict. You're going to deal with family conflict. And then you're going to deal with, supernatural conflict. So there's all kinds of things that these characters can encounter. And so, yeah, it can certainly, I would agree it's definitely more grim and realistic than it is grim, dark, or grotesque fantasy, so to speak. The characters are definitely not traditional grimdark anti-heroes. The players will create a character. The character will be placed into the fiction based on where they kind of want to create a character or where, but generally they get to kind of put their character in perspective to the Dredgewater world. And then we proceed to play, and I roll random variables that'll show up on the, a random variable, which could be a positive thing occurring in the world, could be a negative thing occurring in the world. Generally, they're going to be things that would create conflict or things that they're going to ultimately, they might not like, right? And some of it very dangerous, right? Okay. So I thought I should address that Dark Age of Man is definitely not grimdark. It doesn't even have to be grim. I mean, the game can be played as we play tested many a game that were certainly not all grim, but this particular Chronicles, this particular 4-session Chronicles, it is a heavy dark world in that there was famine and flooding and the pagan Christian what I will say religicide, right? I mean, they're Christians, trying to convert or kill pagans, and yeah, so it's definitely not. It was a short, shitty life for people in the Dark Ages, and we're certainly, and of course, our game is lethal. I mean, they get basically 4 wounds and they're dead, right? So or they're on the verge of death. So it's very, very dangerous. Okay, which means you play like a human being. You play like somebody who's, shouldn't be too willy-nilly willing to charge into the fray or insult the king or et cetera, et cetera. Okay. All right. So I ended up rolling the random C generator 7 times last night, 5 of which they actually encountered or heard of, 2 of which they have just a rumor of, and 1 of which they don't even have a rumor of, right? There was no way for me to kind of introduce that to the fiction before this session was over. And 1 was a passing, a bit of information that Brian was going to, as Sylvester was going to investigate before he discovered his family's home might be overrun by deserters and pagans, and so that kind of changed his route. But he's aware of this thing. And then the other 5, they actually encountered in play, which was very cool. So out of 15 possible results on the 3-6 chart, randomly rolled and generated, I was fortunate I didn't roll any double the last time. Very often I'll roll a 10, and then later in the game I'll roll another 10, and I don't roll again. I'll just say, okay, that nothing new is coming up. But I happened to roll 7 distinct different results last night. It was very cool. the first one I rolled was oh God, I can't remember now. What are my notes? Oh yeah, so you can see uh, as I generate the random roll, I note it in chronological order. So the first thing I rolled was number 9, which was an alderman of in the vassal, an alderman vassal to Lord Washburn. And those of you who don't know, in session 2 ended with Washburn declaring war on Jarek the Viking and Mort, his southern border long-term enemy, as he discovered that the Vikings and Mort were working together, so he declared war. He sent John, his man-at-arms, to raise the fear from all the aldermans. There are 3 aldermans in the county, and John was supposed to go amass an army. He sent Sylvester to scout the potential threat of Jarek's Viking army and to investigate the threat of Mort on the border. That was all ultimately simulated as the 2 weeks between our sessions. So they got the information. I didn't want Chronicle 3 to be Cy banging around in the woods investigating the Vikings, and I didn't want session 3 to be Ethelwald banging around the convent in Howard Town and Vider banging around the slums of Howard Town. And so I wanted to give them 2 weeks worth of information to kind of fast forward the game into the more immediate major and minor dilemmas, which you create. So the only thing you create for a session in our game is again, I've said this before, the kind of the setup, the inciting incident, what they're going to be aware of, and then the major and minor dilemma, which is generally hidden from them, but they can glean some of that from other information. It's a 1-page session prep, and then your random seeds of 3 to 18. And then, of course, everything that's occurred is in context. Everything we've already had happen. We have to track the NPCs that are relevant to them and what's gone on, etc. In that sense, no different than any other campaign, right? You run a D&D campaign, you better keep notes on who they've talked to and what's happening in the world, etc. So in that sense, nothing really different. So we started out again with all of them returning, and I've talked in 2 videos kind of about the setup of how the game was going to start last night, so I'm not going to cover that again. Sylvester's coming back with Wesweld. He's learned what kind of young man Wesweld, who is the heir apparent to Washburn. They are returning after their work scouting the enemy. I put in front of Sylvester a conflicted young 17-year-old Wesweld. Brian picks up on it, and he solicits what's going on with the boy. The boy then tells him that he's concerned that all these refugees, the rumors of what's happening in his father's in Dredge, the rumors that they're killing pagans and they're running off these were residents, these were serfs, these were their people. Despite them being pagans, they're going to leave and go. Not only they're going to evacuate, those that are left alive are going to evacuate, and they're going to ultimately go to the enemy, and they're going to lose. So basically, he's torn. That this isn't right. Opening the door for Brian, if he wants to work on the boy, and he chooses to. Brian actually basically delivers an interesting speech to the boy. And I asked him to make a roll based on his prestige to actually change the boy's makeup. And he succeeds. Not only does he succeed, I think he rolls like an 11 or something. And the boy then decides to step up and do what he thinks is right. And he rallies all of these refugees to him. And he says, come back with me and I'll basically protect you. I won't allow this to continue. I will deal with my mother and my father. But that wouldn't have happened had Brian not bothered to, or Brian could have said, because again, we don't know what Brian's character is totally, right? We don't know where he's going, right? So that was kind of fascinating. So he rallies up these refugees. Meanwhile, Vidar and Ethelwald are coming back. They learn of the alderman Daedrin, who had rolled on the sheep. They learn that the alderman had amassed a camp only a couple of miles from Dredgewater, northeast of Dredgewater. They could see it from the old Empire Road, the old Roman roads. And a couple of horsemen. Vidar cuts off a couple of horsemen riders that are headed to Dredgewater, and they find out who he is, and they basically tell him, well, we don't have to go, then deliver a message to your lord. He will not raise the fjord, and the alderman Daedrin is going to stop this insanity of you killing pagans. And Vidar, of course, is basically a holy warrior. He's committed himself to this Christian way, even though he's very confused. The people he's following and the people that he thinks are Christians. So Vidar is conflicted big time, and it's very volatile for Vidar. It turns into a fisticuffs at the end of the session between Vidar and potentially Sylvester. Thank God Vidar did not have a weapon when this went down. Let's put it that way. So Vidar and Ethelwald continue on it down to Dredge. At the same time, roughly Sylvester is now. Then the second thing I rolled was pregnant woman, and again, I can make any contextual sense of what this means. But because they had rallied these pagan women and children that were remaining, and they were all going back to Dredge, trusting that the young Wesweld would protect them and that he would do what he promised. I just basically had this woman go into labor there on the road in the rain and begin to give birth to this child. And Sylvester kneels down and whispers to her and tells her, Diana will take care of you. And then he made a roll. And because of his success on that roll, it became a very easy delivery. The child was born very quickly. The woman survived. The baby survived. And then he had an opportunity assessing of the six or eight women that were there to help this woman deliver, and he was aiding her. He could assess that about half of them didn't like him. Obviously he was wearing a Dredgewater kit. He was wearing the garb of the Dredgewater, so they didn't trust him. He picked up on that, and then he made a pact with the pagan women there that the first time ever in sessions he's actually declared out loud to strangers that he was a pagan, that he believed what they believed and trust him. And then he made a blood pact with the pagan, one of the pagan elderly women, and that earned him in a way 8 allies that would at some point he might be able to draw on, etc. So he really does at this point 2 things: goes public that he is indeed a pagan, and makes a pact and connects directly with this woman, Shira, Shira, right? Shira, right? Okay. Then they all travel back down. Wesweld, of course, comes in. He sees the number of pagans in a pen. The sergeant at arms, he sees evidence in the rain of all the dried blood and all the stained cloaks, etc. That that the rumors that they had been murdering pagans, the heads on pikes, the pagans hanging from the trees, pagans on pretty. I mean, all the things he had been hearing and rumors and passing and refugee pagans, etc., turned out to be true. There was pogroms, and they were indeed executing men, especially the men. And they had a pin of about 20, 30 pagans that had agreed to convert. So immediately the sergeant comes up and says, these pagans need to be converted. So Ethelwald goes over to convert these pagans. Wesweld wants to know where John, the man-at-arms, is. They all find out in horror that John went AWOL. John basically took, he was the man-at-arms. He was the right-hand man of Lord Washburn. And when they began to kill pagans, John, who's a Christian, but this isn't the way he wanted. He didn't want to see their neighbors and their countrymen being slaughtered solely for this, Lady Washburn post the pogroms while Lord Washburn is in a coma, sick, and she is being advised. Rumor is she's being advised by Father Falcone, who is the local head of the church priest. Okay. So Sylvester now is beside himself. How does his commander, his captain, his chief, his abandon the Lord, go AWOL, and worse, he went with Jules and Dar to his family home, which he finds out later, as Vidar is looking for Dar, and a peasant tells him that Dar went with Jules and John to Sylvester's family home. Vidar then approaches Sylvester and said, "What's going on here? Why are pagans going to your family home?" So you got to understand, Vidar at this point believes that Sylvester's his leader and Sylvester's kind of his rock. And Sylvester's, he believes, I think, is a Christian. He certainly believes, he knows he's certainly fathering Father Ethelwald as he's a Christian, but he's confused that Father Ethelwald, at least this is my take, and I think Dale's touched on this a bit. He's confused that Father Ethelwald is not a zealot and that he is not determined to convert these pagans. He's too lenient. He's not what Vidar thinks Ethelwald should be as a Christian dealing with these pagans. And Sylvester, hasn't yet figured out, is not a Christian, right? It's been a kind of quiet. Wesweld takes charge down in the town of Dredgewater. He has not yet gone to the palisade. He has not yet approached his mother and his father, and he's giving them commands: free those damn pagans. And by the way, I don't want any pagan converted at sword point. If they want to become Christian, they do it voluntarily. Stop this nonsense. And he ordered them to take down the pikes and the heads on pikes. He ordered them to, take down the hanging bodies. This comes to an end. He orders Vidar to ride out to the Alderman Daedra's camp and tell him, I want to have a parley with him, organize it. So Vidar rides out, meets them. They tell him tomorrow at noon, he'll meet you, equidistant from both camps, from, Dredgewater and from the camp. Vidar returns, tells this to Sylvester. Sylvester relays this to Wesweld. Wesweld gets some advice from Ethelwald, and then he retires into the Black Leaf Inn, out of the rain, to gather his thoughts, to rest, to eat, to warm up, whatever. Sylvester, hearing that Jules and Dar and John have gone to his family home, he immediately goes, what the hell? That's what's that about? And I think he thinks the worst. They've gone there to maybe murdered his family, maybe taken hostages, whatever. So he mounts up. He was going to go over to the Daedra camp and look for one of his soldiers, Marcus, but he decides to detour home first. He does talk Brother Ethelwald into coming with him, and they go. And they arrive at his home, and they find him there camping. They find him all happy to see him, handshakes. They have not. They are there because Jules. So in the previous session, Jules was going up to stand before the Lord Washburn, and he was going to face probably potential execution for handing out the Lord's food to the starving poor. But Brian had, in a way, instigated that, or not instigated, they worked together, but Brian felt responsible for Jules, and so he caught up with the arresting officers, and he talked them into giving Jules his custody. And he told Jules, go to my family home and stay with my father. Stay there. I'll come get you, and we'll go together to talk to the Lord Washburn so I can speak on your behalf. And so he did. And this was in session 2. And in front of Lord, he accepted responsibility for what Jules did. He did these things, for me. And Washburn then accepted that, but he still publicly whipped Jules, but he didn't kill him, right? So Jules, of course, when the pogroms were posted during the 2 weeks they were all away, they escaped. And Jules said, I'm not hanging around here. This is out of credit. So they leave. But Jules, again, this was a roll, by the way. All it says on my chart is John, Jules, and Dar. That's it. And I said, well, what makes the most sense out of this? Where would they go? What does this mean? Because it can mean anything, right? It can mean John's hunting them. It can mean that Jules and Dar have killed John. I mean, I could come up with any variable as just to add to the fiction. But I decided to make it John goes AWOL because he can't tolerate what they're doing to his countrymen. Instead of John going out to raise the fjord, John walked away from his duties, right? So you can imagine there is no army here to protect him from the Vikings and from Mort, if indeed this is the problem. Matter of fact, Daedra has come here now to say, we're not going to let you kill the pagans. We're not going to let you wipe out Dredgewater citizens, right? So the irony is they have no army, they have no fjord because John didn't do his duties, right? So this is fallout from John not doing what the Lord told him to do because she hung up a pogrom and they started killing. They commanded him to murder the pagans and will convert first. So you can imagine John said, I'm not doing this. And he and Jules and Dar escape Dredgewater, and they go where the only place Jules thinks is safe, that is Sylvester's family home. So they get there, they find out they're there trying to amass a pagan revolt, trying to amass a pagan army. We finally meet Sylvester's father, as Brian kind of gives me an idea who his father is. His father's a devout Christian. He's an older, broad-shouldered man. We end up seeing Dar and Vidar almost go at it. And in that fray, fortunately, they don't end up in a fisticuffs. The big 6'8" Viking and Vidar get into a scuffle. They go inside to discuss plans, and we meet Sylvester's father. And John, Sylvester discussed it. How could you walk away from your you've sworn loyalty to Lord Washburn. How could you do this? How could you, you're my commander. And John explains it to him. Well, like, this is something I couldn't do. And of course, Sylvester's saying, yeah, but you could have fought against it. You could, and he said, that's what I'm trying to do. So we have this great, again, conflict between, So anyway, John follows him into the home to discuss this. He wants brother Ethelwald in private to convince John of the right thing to do. So we go inside and we have this role play. And of course, there's some dice rolls to see if they convince John. There's some dice rolls to see what occurs. Vidar at this point learns that Sylvester is a pagan from his father. His father, a Christian, tells him, don't waste your breath, Vidar. I've been working to get this kid to become a Christian since he was a tyke. He walks out. The father doesn't want to be in here and hear all this nonsense. So he leaves. And Vidar has a breakdown. He makes a roll to control himself. He fells the roll, and Vidar ends up going after Sylvester. John steps in front. Vidar rolls a critical punch on him, which if he had a weapon, it'd be a critical wound. It would have basically rendered. That would have rendered John in a bad way, but he still rolled a critical. And I said, you hit him so hard that it's probably, this is going to probably break his jaw. Meanwhile, though, Ethelwald says, well, I step in to get some of that. So Ethelwald, but he describes it in such a way that he absorbs some of the punishment in the critical punch. So Ethelwald takes a wound, which is battered. So now Ethelwald gets knocked down, bangs his head, he's battered. John, instead of maybe having a critical wound, ends up with his teeth knocked out. Vidar then storms out, and we end there because we've got a lot of unsaid things to finish. And we decided the fourth chronicle, which is our final chronicle of this series of games, our sessions, we're going to pick up the following morning. And of course, the next day, there's some things that are unresolved. One, they still don't know what's going on in the palisade, locked in behind the palisade walls with his mother and his sick father and Falcone. They don't know the status of anything there. They did learn, John does tell them, and it was one of the rolls I made on the chart, which they learn about, was one of the seeds that they learned about. John says, we have a person on the inside, which I had rolled on the chart. That person is, and so he assures Side, we do actually have a spy inside the palisade. So they learned that. They learned that there's a supposed VIP camped a couple of miles north of Dredgewater, but they don't know who this VIP is. And these are rumors. They can't get pinned down whether it's true or whether who it could be. And they, of course, have the meeting. Wesweld has the meeting with the Alderman Daedrin at noon this upcoming day. So we'll start session 4, Chronicles 4. We'll start with the morning, and then they can decide where they want to go, what they want to do. But they're all together. Ethelwald's with Sai and with Vidar at Sylvester's family home. With them are Jules, Dar, the NPCs, Jules, Dar, and John, the former master at arms, and of course Jules' father. We've met Sylvester's father, Maximus. Very cool. Unbelievably fun. Again, no combat. So much of this was, again, they're dealing with cultural conflict. They're dealing with political conflict, and oddly enough, some family conflict. It's very fascinating how it's gone. But I could have rolled. There's stuff on the sheet that could be directly dangerous, violent. I don't want to spoil it and give stuff away because there's stuff that I've carried over from every session. So if I say dragon is on that list and they don't encounter it, dragon carries over. So dragon has been on my random. Dragon isn't, but as an example, dragon could be on every one of those random seed lists carried through until it arrives, or it may never show up. So I don't want to actually spoil that information. But there are obviously supernatural things, and there are very dangerous things. There's something they've heard rumor of. Well, they haven't heard, yeah, they heard rumor of it, but they heard rumor of it through the actual inciting incident, but they have not heard actually in session talk of this, and they haven't seen any evidence of this. And that is some story about a demon, a decay demon that's feasting on the bodies that are left around. But that was in the pre-session inciting incident information. They actually haven't heard or seen this live in session, but that's something else that they would not want to forget. That there's stories of this, because there's been so many bodies from the famine, um, in the middle of winter, frozen people dying and freezing to death and starvation. Those bodies, plus the pagans that have been left dead and hanging, and from that has arisen this decay demon, right? That they kind of know about, but yet didn't really come up in session. So that's kind of what's going on. So great. Again, remarkable. What was really cool last night was so many dice rolls followed role play or social, in a way, social conflict, like Sylvester picking up that Wesweld was disturbed, and then picking up, as he asked questions, and Wesweld told him, "I'm conflicted. Why are we doing this? Why are we letting these people leave our lands and joining our enemies? I mean, this is not good for our future." And Brian could have argued in any direction he wanted, but he made this really brilliant little speech about Pax Romana and about what it takes to be a good leader, what it does, and that inspired. But he had to make a roll to actually change Wesweld's kind of upbringing. So Wesweld has been raised a devout Christian, his mother a zealot, his father not so much, but he's a 17-year-old heir apparent, and he would most likely fall right in line with Mama's decree, right? These pagans. But this interesting, Brian could have gone another way, or could have filled that role, and Wesweld wouldn't have taken charge. He wouldn't have rallied these poor pagans and said, I'm going to be your champion, and I'm going to save you from this craziness. That's not what us Christians do. Could have well been, let's go finish the job. It could have well been Wesweld rides in and says, what are these pagans doing alive? If they haven't been converted, kill them. It could have been something like that. It could have been, and then Brian would have been dealing with a 17-year-old zealot kid that's taken over because John is gone, right? But I didn't know John would be gone because I hadn't rolled John, Jules, and Dar. So what was so cool is, so the first thing I rolled right out of the gate, the first roll 9, Daedrin, Alderman shows up. And then I had to decide, what does that mean? Is he there for the Fjord? Is he there? And I said, no, you know what? I think he's there to be a sympathizer to the pagans. So I'm kind of trying to figure out what's his motive for being there. Okay. Then I rolled, I can't even read. Let me get my glasses. Then the second roll was 13, pregnant woman, which we dealt with. And then I rolled 12, which they don't know anything about. I rolled Wesweld, and that was the when he arrived at Dredgewater, how he assumed command and began to bark orders and began to declare technically the exact opposite of his mother's decree. So Weswelt has taken a stance, and he's made orders, and he's commanded men, and he's commanded Vidar, and he's commanded Sylvester, he's commanded his men, and he has publicly said, my mother's pogroms are wrong. So that was number 6, and that was the final piece of that when I rolled Wesweld. But Wesweld could have been anything. Could have been sick with a plague. I could have made Wesweld. Again, all it says is Wesweld. What does this mean? So I try to put it in context. Then I rolled another one that they're not aware of, which they have heard kind of about. Then I rolled, which was number 14. And then I rolled number 8, John, Jules, and Dar, which is when he learned that John, Dar, and remember, when I roll one, if it's already kind of come up or if it's already happening, I will immediately roll another one, so I have more stuff that I can draw on as they're banging around Dredgewater, as they're in a fight or a dialogue with Wesweld, as Brother Ethelwald's preaching. I might make another roll. So the John, Dar, and Jules followed pretty quick. So in that one scene where Wesweld is commanding him to release the pagans and telling Brother Ethelwald, convert the ones that want to be converted, but don't mess with them. Feed these guys, let them go, give them weapons. Well, so Sai's like, wait a minute, slow down on the giving them weapons thing, right? We need to make sure these people aren't our enemy. Okay. And Ethelwald was like, whoa, slow down on the weapons part, right? But meanwhile, I rolled I rolled one, which they kind of heard rumor about among this group of people, and then that's where Vidar learned that Dar had absconded with John and Jules to so those three happened just in the Dredgewater when they all arrived in Dredgewater. Bang, 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 three seeds, bang, 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 were unfolded in front of the players. And then, of course, there's another one they are completely and utterly unaware of, and that's it. So there were like 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, there were 7, and they have encountered 1, 2, 3, 4 of those. So 3 of them are kind of unknown to them still. They might have heard rumor of one of them, and that's it. So they have some loose ends. They have the meeting. Wesweld is meeting with Daedra, the alderman who wants to end this pagan. He is basically a sympathizer for the pagans. He might even be a pagan alderman, right? They haven't met him. I don't know. I'm naive. I don't know. I might have them make a luck check. If they actually are there, they may not actually assist Wesweld in this meeting with the alderman, right? They don't have to. They're not required to be there, as Wesweld is the acting lord outside the palisade. They might then choose to go investigate this so-called rumor of a VIP. Who knows, right? They might, who knows what they're going to do, where they're going to go, and I don't know all the details. But that's it. That's Dark Age of Man Chronicles Session 3. It was fantastic. I can't say I'm thrilled with Discord. I've been, Discord seems to work best when we do no video. So our Joth games with no video have been fine. There doesn't seem to be any issues with us just talking. But the minute we get those video on, and I think for the most part, Brian, I, and Sam didn't have any issues with our audio or our video, whether that's our quality of our internet or whether that's the quality of the sources we're using. I'm using a desktop, which is phenomenal. I think Sam was using a laptop, and Brian, I think, is using his rig, the rig he records and edits videos and things on. But we didn't have any issues. But Dell, unfortunately, whether it's his internet or whether it's the device he's using, I had to turn him all the way up 200% of volume. So in the video, so the first thing I do is I try to get everybody's mic levels, and I just try to adjust their audio so I can kind of keep it somewhat stable for our video that I record. And then I have to, in my recording software, I have to adjust my mic separately from their stuff, right? I mean, anybody who uses these tools knows that, there's multiple mics generally. So they're set. I try to align them so I can make sure that we can hear them at roughly the equal level you can hear me. I had Dell turned all the way up to 200%, wouldn't go any higher. I was still having trouble hearing Dell. Part of it could have been my headphones. I went to the mic headphones. I thought it would make it better for me to communicate, but the actual headphones themselves are cheaper. And of course, there were times that Dell would cut in and out. So there were times I was very frustrated, not with Dell, but with the fact that I'm not certain what he said. The final scene at the table where he was having these amazing, you could tell that he was expressing Vidar's internal conflict and rage, but I was missing pieces of that. And some of that could be important details that would give me context for what Sai's father might say, or what John might say, so there were things that I might have missed that might have been pertinent to the context of this conflict occurring between the players and the NPCs. It's certainly between player versus player, Sai and Vidar, right? So I may have missed some key subtle details that Dell's providing because I couldn't hear it or because it would break up, etc. So I was definitely not happy with the actual quality of that session as far as video and audio. Since we've stopped using Zoom, which Zoom has been by far the most consistent and the most highest quality that I've had in the last couple of years of doing this. But of course, none of us want to pay for the Zoom full feature, right? But the reality is Discord at times has just been disappointing when we try to do video, and there may be other resources out there I haven't investigated because I'm getting through it, but we're going to have to figure something out before Chronicle Session 4, I think. After Chronicle Session 4, I don't want to not continue to play with Dell and Brian and Sam. I want to continue to play with them, but that'll just end this particular set of 4 Chronicle, this particular set of 4 sessions, the Chronicles. I would love then for Sam or Brian or Dell to to do the presenter seat in a Dark Age of Man game. I would like to be a character in. Now, whether they want to do a one-off and just, Sam dip his toe in how Dark Age of Man runs, but I would like to play in our own game a little bit. So one of the reasons I offered up 4 is it's doable, right? Number one. Plus, I like. So in what we're doing with Dark Age of Man in this particular introduction of our game, really, because we're not playtesting it. The game's done. We're not making any changes to the game. The only thing we change would be typos or grammar and art. The game's done. So this is really our first public. We're actually playing Dark Age of Man. This is not a playtest, and so this was like our first public kind of offering to see how this works and to enjoy it. Dell and I want to enjoy the fruits of our labor. We wrote a game we want to play. We wrote a game we want to GM. And so that's what this is. But I wanted it to be doable. I didn't want to ask people to commit to an infinite campaign. I didn't want to say something like, let's just start a campaign. No, I wanted this to be, and part of that is because it allows for these sessions to be really loaded, as they know there's a limited number of sessions in which we're going to have these characters reveal themselves, and these characters encounter conflicts, and these characters be affected by these things, and these characters attempt to change the world based on the grim that shows up, right? Or not, right? It could, very well couldn't have. So last night they didn't earn any repute. There were no amazing heroic acts. There was acts of humanity in which Sylvester aided the pregnant woman who was giving birth, gave her hope and made a great role. He gave Wesweld. He turned Wesweld. I was very close to issuing a repute for that, except it wasn't like he had to talk Wesweld into not being a pagan murdering zealot, right? Wesweld was already conflicted, so all he had to do was make a successful role and make that cognate. But if I had presented Wesweld as a zealot, can't wait to get back to Dredgewater and help Mama kill all the pagans, and then he somehow convinces the boy to change heart, that would have been worth a repute. It had to be in a way epic, and it had to be seen in front of other people. Okay. So that's why no repute for that. And then they didn't actually achieve a major or a minor dilemma, therefore no repute for the party. So they actually went through a 2.5-hour session dealing with some major stuff and didn't resolve the major or minor dilemma. And so there was no repute earned. We've had a couple of sessions where they've earned 1 or 2 repute, but last night was pretty intense. Really is setting the stage for the final denouement, right? We're setting the final stage for that climactic final episode, as they've got to resolve, and the major and the minor dilemma will probably just carry over to Chronicle Session 4. There might be some tweaks to the major and minor dilemma based on what Wesweld has done, right? So they'll get an update as to inciting incident for Chronicle Session 4, but they've got some threads already in the inciting incident. They've got the meeting with the alderman who's there to stop the pagan slaughter. We've got Wesweld who's going against his mother's decrees. That's pretty serious stuff right there, right? Meanwhile, we don't know how the alderman's going to take this 17-year-old lord, right? We don't know. So there's these things. And then, of course, we got rolls on the charts that throw variables into action. And we have Lord Washburn, rumored to be incapacitated. We have Lady Washburn, rumored to be getting her advice from Father Falcone. And we don't know what's happening behind the palisade walls, and we don't know how bad it is, etc. So there's major and minor dilemmas there that weren't dealt with. And now those major and minor dilemmas will be tweaked a little bit based on what the Lord Wesweld has done by saying, stop, that's it. Whatever my mother's decrees say, in this right now. And they're so far, they're following orders. And then we still have the Mort border threat, and we still have the Vikings on the northwest shore of Dredge River. That, quite honestly, they can't be concerned with right now because they've got major issues in actual Dredge water. So it's been unbelievable. The game, when you create something mechanically, you can play test the mechanics, improve the mechanics work. The math works, the mechanics work. You can then have this kind of philosophy or this ideal of how you expect people to play your game, and you could try to write rules that will kind of explain how to play the game, so they'll have the intended, they'll get the intent of the experience. But you can't ever really know how it's going to, And so this has proved that 100% it is. Now, granted, I'm running it, and of course, so I know how to implement the or write up the one-page thing. I know how to implement the stuff. I know how to give them room to be their character. I know how to give them room to affect the world and be in the world without necessarily completely writing the world or changing the world, right? So it's very natural for me. So of course, I can't really look at my part of the game as proving, hey, it works, but I can look at how their characters are working, functioning, and how the mechanics are being called up. As Wesweld delivers this amazing speech to Sylvester to Wesweld, and then he has to make a check with his prestige to basically change the boy's potential direction. And then Ethelweld, of course, with his conversations with, it's been amazing. Vidar's the one character that 90% of the conflict is his own. I mean, Vidar is actually dealing with internal conflict through 3 sessions. It's amazing that Vidar, now granted, Vidar's had an actual confrontation with killing Martin, the pagan, but again, that was because he has internal conflict. Oh, we're supposed to kill these guys, and so he slaughtered Martin in front of people. He's been conflicted as to why Ethelwald's not more a zealot, and I'm following this guy Sylvester, and then he finds out Sylvester's a pagan. It's been interesting to watch Vidar. His character's completely all been internal conflict, and his external comes from him losing control, his inability to handle this rage and frustration when things aren't what he thinks they should be. It's fascinating. And of course, Sylvester has got this actual conflict with what he doesn't want to see, violence and war, but he's got a job to do as he's sworn fealty to this family. He's grown up here. He's got his own family home. And Sylvester's got more of these outside juggling of the world and the conflicts and trying not to let them get out of control. And what can he do and what can't he do, and who is he and who isn't he, and who am I to tell Wesweld what he should think? So I have to kind of tiptoe carefully around telling this lord, my lord, the heir apparent, what I would do. Was masterful. And then Brother Ethelweld is an outsider who was brought here to convert pagans, and he gets here and finds out it's a shithole. He finds out it's in the middle of the worst winter on record, famine, people dead in the streets and frozen, and Ethelweld's overwhelmed with, I just trying to feed people. I'm just trying to. And then he finds out Father Falcone is basically an incompetent priest who's been using the word of the god either not at all or for his own devices. And so Ethelweld's got, it has been very rewarding, and we are seeing the political conflict, the internal conflict, the cultural conflicts. It's been truly remarkable, and we have yet to actually see really a sword fight. They fought wolves in the first session. I rolled wolves. First thing I rolled at number 11, right smack in the middle, wolves, and they ended up fighting off a pack of wolves, in which Vidar's almost killed in the very first 15 minutes of the very first chronicle, which leads to him meeting Father Falcone, and Father Falcone laying a guilt trip on him, which starts Vidar's, which is amazing because it started Vidar's zealotry, because Falcone says something to him that actually lays a guilt trip on him for the death of his wife and his son. And Vidar, that's where it triggers Vidar's commitment to this Christian way, and then thinks that Sai is that representation and is following Sai around, and then finds out Sai ain't the Christian warrior he thought he was. It has been amazing to watch it all unfold, because Brian was walking a fine line of not committing to whether he was a Christian or wasn't a Christian. There were moments he would drop hints, and but was he doing that just to relate to the pagans, etc.? And then last night, on record publicly, he admits that he's a pagan. He believes what these women believe, and that he's going to do what he can. He's decided, witnessing the birth of this child, that he can't now not act. But then he gets down there and finds out John has gone AWOL. So clearly John can't allow it to happen, but John abandoned his post instead of fighting it. So Sylvester's angry about it, right? And then Ethelwald is overwhelmed with these, what do I do? Do I convert all these pagans, or do I not? He's, Ethelwald's in a way, a crisis of faith, right? He's not certain whether this thing is working out the way he thinks it should work, which is through peace and love. And compassion, humanity, versus maybe just taking up a damn weapon and saying screw this and fighting the evils that are perpetrated upon other human beings, kind of thing. It's been remarkable, and it's been amazing because we don't, you don't know you just don't know what's going to happen, what's going to come up, and how it's going to play out. And it's been a great fun. It's remarkable, different experience. Joth is remarkable. I'm having these wonderful experiences in Joth. Simba Room has been better than I could have imagined, right? Not because of the people I'm playing with. I know who these guys are, and I know these guys, no matter what I do with David and Todd and John, and we're going to have great times no matter what we choose to play. But Simba Room as a mechanical set, which I had already encountered at 6 sessions locally, so I knew Simba Room was, and I've talked about this before, I knew Simba Room was a mechanical game and setting that I appreciated as a player, as a GM. But I didn't know Simba Room would be so much fun. Sharing the GM seat has been brilliant. And then to play Dark Age of Man, which is a completely and utterly different experience. And this is role playing. I'm playing in Joth. I'm sharing Simba Room as a player and GM, and I'm GMing my game. And they're all completely different experiences, and every one of them are fantastic. I couldn't say that, well, I just don't like what we're doing in Dark Age. I just don't like. They're all completely different, and they are all incredibly rewarding. And that's this hobby. And if you're willing to play this hobby with non-hard restrictions, I'm never going to play that game because I hate story games, then you're missing out. And I'm never going to play D&D because it's all about killing shit, then you're missing out, right? You're missing an opportunity to enjoy this hobby and all of its options. And I think that's a sad place to be. So, but that's fans, right? Fans are fanatics, and they tend to get in bed with the thing they love, and then they're going to literally beat back what they don't love, and they're going to foster what they do love. And then there's plenty of people out there clearly that love the hobby and love all these different options, games and genres and choices, and that's fine too. So, all right, everybody have a wonderful week upcoming. I think we're going to play Simba Room Wednesday night. I don't know, but we'll see. All right, bye.